Tere kõigile.
Good afternoon, those of you present here in the auditorium, watching us online. Thank you, Christian, for this warm introduction. I have indeed been involved in integration issues for maybe too long even. It's something that has turned my hair grey. But I'm very pleased to remind you and think back that our first integration conference took place 24 years ago in 1999, and we had world-famous names, Will Gimlicka, John Berry, David Miller, and others who were present here in Tallinn. And I'm pleased that in these 25 years we have actually kept on going, and we have very prominent speakers, presenters, researchers in the field of integration. And I would like to stress Maurice Krull's presence here over the last 10 years. Maurice is one of the leading integration experts in Europe. But when you look at my first slide, then you can actually see that there's someone who contributed to my presentation, Marianna Makarova from the government office. She then covered this common sphere of information topic. We have worked on many projects with Marianna, and as an officer in the government office, she's a strategic communications advisor, then she often has very good foresights. I'm also very pleased to link my presentation to the previous panel and Vello Pettai's presentation, because Vello Pettai always has new ideas, important ideas. Vello is actually someone who has shaped and contributed to the shaping of our integration policy in Estonia, and currently he is then representing an institute in Europe of minorities. So he's the director of this institute, and we're very pleased that he could join us here. I enjoyed Vello's presentation, but I do not quite agree with some points that Vello made in his presentation. I think that this debate, whether we should transfer to Estonian-speaking education, we've actually had the debate. We've had it for 30 years. And finally, we have seen that these intermediary ways, they don't work. So I think that this transition is important, so that no matter what the native language of the children in Estonia is, they would all have equal opportunities to the labor market. Currently, it's not so, and one of the reasons is that we have a segregated education system. But coming to my presentation, then I actually do continue just as sharply as Vello. So the question is, who are our people at times of war? So the simplest answer to this question is that these are those people living in Estonia who share common values. But the problem with the answer is that no one has defined what these common values actually are. I remember from a few years ago, President Kaljulaid, in her Estonian Independence Day speech, she used this shared customs term. So we can't define this term. So the initial answer that our people are the ones who share common values, well, it just isn't enough, because there are different opinions that are important. So be it an authoritarian or a totalitarian society, or well, there's only one opinion. So the topic of my presentation is similar to what Vello touched upon and that many of the previous speakers have said, how do we bring together this common part and the difference in opinions? And if I just jump ahead, then actually I do have an answer to this question. But I'm not going to give you the answer before I have actually come to the conclusions of my presentation, because it's a very complex answer, so we'll come to it step by step. So our presentation is actually based on theoretical presumptions. So when studying groups, then it is stated that people's attitudes are not stable, but they depend on the situation. They depend on the temperature of the situation. There's a hot versus a cold situation. For example, Russia's aggression in Ukraine has also caused a hot situation in its neighboring countries. In this situation, there's a tendency that this other group is seen either as an homogeneous whole, and it's seen in sort of in a negative light. So our presentation, mine and Marianna's, we would like to sort of come with a different theoretical differentiation, that there is the perspective of the researcher and the perspective of those who are in action. So as researchers, our point of view is based on what's going on around us. So we look at the television news, what's going on in Ukraine, what's happening in other destinations and locations. Then it's obvious that, we are anxious, we are scared, we want to take action so that things wouldn't be as they are, but it's not enough. Our hands are short. But what researchers can do is that we can carry out empirical researches. We look at what's happening in the society. And my statement is that from the point of view of our integration in Estonia, since Russia's aggression, changes have taken place in Estonia. And these changes are then the focus of our presentation. So empirically, my presentation is based on two databases: the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung survey in May this year. It was presented in September, and this is on the views of Russian-speaking Estonian residents on current news. And the other resource is the survey carried out by the Government Office, which is a public opinion monitoring survey. And this has also then been discussing the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So this slide states my main thesis. So we draw on data that actually support these theses as well. But just looking at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung survey slide, Russians in Estonia and how they sense the attitudes of Estonians towards them. So there are three groups, as you can see, but the attitudes are not that different. In dark red and pink, you see those columns of the respondents who sense that the attitudes of Estonians towards the Russian-speaking population during the war have become more negative. So this actually strengthens the thesis that it's all about the temperature, that it's become more hot, how we sense the other side. So we are planning to show a lot of graphs and tables then that show the different processes in the society, and we are focusing on two central analyses. One focus is then the differentiation within the Russian-speaking population depending on their age. So I supervised a master's thesis this spring where the student was studying Russian-speaking families, the different generations. The student interviewed both the parents as well as the children. And the main conclusion was that Russian families have conflicts within the different generations, the conflicts between the generations, that the younger generation are against the Russian aggression and support Ukraine, but the older generation, the parents, they are of a different opinion. And the idea of my today's presentation is actually based on this master's thesis. It's a qualitative study, but I thought that if I bring the quantitative data that is available, then perhaps this can be certified. And I actually say that, yes, it can be certified, as we will be seeing shortly. And the other focus of the analysis has to do with the dynamics of the changing attitudes. So if we look at the numbers of public surveys, what matters is not what is set at this particular moment, but we look at the timeline. That gives us the dynamics and the understanding of what's actually going on. So from the Friedrich Ebert Foundation survey, I selected the indicators, and I have analyzed then these indicators, how they have gone through the changes, and also based on internal heterogenics. So I said this is the Friedrich Ebert Foundation survey, that since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the attitude of 41% of the Russians in Estonia has deteriorated towards Russia. So this is the process that has been rather quick process. I also have names of the politicians, how the opinion of these politicians is, and this shows how fragmented Estonia actually is internally, how the Russians are fragmented. Attitude towards Russian military activity in Ukraine. So this is based on age groups. And again, we see that the younger age group, they feel negatively, 80% of the respondents. And as for the ones who are older, it's somewhere between 40 and 50%. So this age differentiation is something that does come up. Allies must continue to offer military support to Ukraine. Again, the age dynamics is very clear and visible. The same, are you supportive of being part of NATO or are you against it? This slide is also the support of being part of NATO. This slide has to do with people's foreign policy orientations. We know that if we look at the different segments of our nationalities in Estonia, then historically, Estonians and Russians, they have very different opinions and attitudes towards NATO and towards Russia. So this depends on people's cultural background, their historical background. So the dynamics here is that before Russia invading Ukraine, then before being part of NATO was supported by 26% of Russians, and at the moment it has gone up to 53%. So in these 18 months, the NATO support has gone up by 50%. And if we put this in the macrohistorical perspective, then this shows that there has been a fundamental change in the thinking. So on the first slide, we saw that 40% have said that their attitude to Russia has worsened. And here we see that twice as many people who are of Russian background in Estonia support being part of NATO or pro-NATO. So this shows a massive shift that has taken place in the Estonian society, and it has to do with the integration topic. So a very important basis for this is the common information sphere that we live in, and I would like to invite Marianna on stage, and she will continue this presentation. Thank you, Raivo, for inviting me, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss these topics. As Raivo already mentioned, we have been cooperating for over 15 years on different projects, but he's also been my academic mentor when I did my PhD. So a common information sphere, why is it important? And as Raivo has already mentioned, the government office, since the war escalated in Ukraine and prior to that during COVID, we've carried out public surveys. Usually we have partnered with a survey company, Turu Uuringud, and the same in this case. So when looking at the situation, and I deal with strategic communication, the information space is an important topic, and analyzing the data, looking across and longitudinally, etc., it has to do with absolutely everything, all the topics, starting with basic psychological things like subjective happiness, being satisfied, and it also has to do with security issues. In order to share one specific example based on figures, so on what is the information space that people use, this affects their own attitudes, and it also affects this cohesion or the non-existence of the cohesion. I used an analysis question. We have used this question more or less since 2022. So we have asked people which media channels do they trust when they read about the war in Ukraine. We have asked this question already in January last year, before the 24th of February last year, and I base my analysis on Estonian channels, so Estonia capitalized, so channels in Estonia that are public broadcasting or that are private channels, either in Estonian or in Russian, and Russian Federation channels. Raivo talked about the age groups, so trusting the media, what is obvious is that there are age trends. Younger people most likely trust the Estonian information space, and they do not trust, again, Russian channels. There are very few amongst the younger generation who still trust Russian media. What is important to note when looking at these figures is that our society is not divided into two, but it's actually divided into three. So about 40%, this top line, trust Estonian media, 20% trust Russian Federation media. However, they have access to it. Then about 30% or 40% are in this grey zone where people trust neither, nor the Estonian nor the Russian, or they haven't taken a position, or they just distance themselves from these very difficult issues. But as for trust, so the information space and supporting NATO, but I'm just going to go back. So how does this relate to people's attitudes? When analyzing the support to Ukrainian war refugees, when analyzing attitudes towards the war situation, allies' support or economic support to Ukraine, there's a very clear connection. Those who trust the Estonian media, they are more empathic towards those issues, and it is most likely that they also support Ukrainian refugees, reception of Ukrainian refugees. The difference is threefold between those who trust the Estonian information channels compared to those who get their information from Russian channels, Russian Federation channels. What is important is that as the perception of how informed you are, when asked, do you know the truth, then that's pretty equal, but the truths are different. And these truths are based on those information sources. Raivo has talked about the support of NATO, which so Russians, as we saw, 53% support. And this is where I'd like to show you this slide. If we divide these two polarized groups and we look at their attitudes, so those who trust the Estonian information space, the number is not 53, but it's even higher. It's 89, which is almost equal to the number of Estonians supporting NATO. 91 is the percent. So those who trust Russian Federation news on the Ukrainian war, their support is not as high as 20% even, barely 20%. NATO, Ukrainian war, are these the only topics where there are differences in this attitudes? So we have another sharp issue, which is then the transition to Estonian language education. Here again, there's a massive contrast. What the attitudes are, the belief in the success of the reform or the stand towards the reform. So they're not one-to-one. They're not similar. It's not about brainwashing. So there are critical voices. So if the support percentage is even twice as high amongst those who trust the Estonian information space compared to those who follow Russian Federation channels. And if we look at from this less classical politicized topic to another one which has received a lot of information, this is the marriage equality. So no matter what nationality you are, if you get your information from one information space, then it's quite clear that yes, you may not agree. So we live in a democratic society, there are different opinions, but both Russians and Estonians, they are supportive of the fact that if we allow same-sex marriages, then it means that everybody is guaranteed the same rights. So we asked this question in May and September, and in September, the non-Estonian speakers, they were more pro.
Neid numbreid uurida. Ja
you can actually check the numbers on our website as well. And I'll come back to these three groups. So those who trust the Estonian information space, the Russian Federation one, and those who don't trust anything. So what is characteristic is that those who trust Russian Federation media, in the case of these channels, they list them as important channels, and those who trust the Estonian media, they follow Estonian media portals, be they either in Estonian or in Russian. So Russian language private media is very important in Estonia. ETV Plus, which is the public broadcasting Russian-speaking channel. But again, it is the more seniors who watch more TV. But if we look at the trust levels, remember those tops, the younger generation and 75 plus age group who support and trust Estonian information sphere. So what helps the unity to become, so in times of crisis, and the COVID crisis experience showed that back in 2020 already Estonian news channels were ahead of Russian Federation channels because people needed the information from the local information space, and that's where they got the information from. But having a public opinion, spokespersons who are multilingual, a strong and free quality media helps to create a common information space. I know that many of you work for NGOs, so your networking is very important. This is all from me. Thank you, Raivo, again, and I will give the floor back to Raivo. So coming back to the answer that I promised to give you at the start of my presentation. So who are our people in times of war, or how do we then link these values? How do we share those values, and how do we link the values and the opinions? So I'm using an article from the daily newspaper Postimees. Aimar Altosaar, the journalist, wrote an article, Who is a Good National? And you can find this article online, and the message was that a good national person is someone who uses national values, but he or she can place them in a larger context. So he or she understands that the society is multifold, that there are other values as well, besides his or hers. There are other opinions, and this is a person who tries to find the golden mean. So my answer to the question, so who are our people in times of war, is that when answering this question, you should look at this position of the person who feels being a good national. So, yes, it is sensing that you are a good person.
Thank you to Raivo. Insight into how the crises, wars, COVID, and so on have changed the attitudes and all sorts of other things in the Estonian society. So we have a time for a few questions. Does anyone from the audience have a question to Raivo or to Marianna? If not, then very quickly, Raivo, to you one question from my side. Well, I have many, but let's leave all of those to the end debate that we have here today. So, what do you think? Is the Ukrainian war, which has taking place at the moment, has it now somehow nullified, eliminated all the activities or actions that have been taking place in the Estonian integration policy for the last 30 years? How much impact the war have, because what Mariano showed that in terms of the trust in media and belonging to the media sphere, people are, the changes are more rapid than it was beforehand. So what do you think, are the crises somehow more amplifying those trends? And what happens after the crises? Do we somehow fall down to the previous levels that we have achieved before those things? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It is a kind of paradoxical situation. We have an awful war in Ukraine, but if we look at the trends, integration trends in Estonian society, these are moving in right direction and very fast. And my explanation just would be that if we are exposed every day, every evening, via TV on what is going on the battleground, I would say that every normal person would react in the way Estonian people are reacting. And and the second part of the question, what will happen after the crisis? Yeah, for me, the most interesting data I have found from these two sources are a kind of very macro changes or changes regarding foreign policy orientations. I cannot say for sure, but my understanding is that this is kind of permanent trend. I do not think that what has happened in Ukraine can be forgiven to Russian political leadership.
Okay, thank you very much.